Hi, and welcome to Crypto for Advisors, a podcast by Synergist. More than a third of Australians are into crypto, yet nearly 90% of advisors will not discuss it with them. I believe this is exposing investors to unnecessary risks, compromising the value of advised relationships, and limiting investment performance. My goal is to educate advisors and investors to bridge this crypto service gap while strengthening advised relationships. So let's get into today's episode. Welcome to another episode of Crypto for Advisors, podcast by Synergist. I have got Amy-Rose Goodey from DECA with me today, which I'm very excited about. Amy is one of the most connected and well-informed people in the industry, being the CEO of DECA, which is the Digital Economy Council of Australia. Amy is a creative tech person. She brings the intersection of creativity and technology into her career. She's got a background in tech with telco and mining industries. She's also a building designer, and importantly, she's been in crypto since 2016, which makes her what is affectionately known as an OG in the industry. So, Amy, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today. How are you?
Thanks, Andrew. It is wonderful to be here. And I think as we keep using the word OG, we're just all going to get older and older. So I'm going to try and move away from OG if I can, because soon it'll be 20 years, it'll be 30 years, and everyone will know that I'm pretty much a grandma.
Oh, well, look, as they say, the only thing worse than getting old is not getting old, Amy.
Yeah, good point.
But 2016, that is a long time in the crypto world, isn't it? It's there's most people, like for me, I only really got into crypto maybe in the 2021. So you've got many years on top of me.
Yeah, and look, we age in dog years in the crypto industry. It feels a lot longer than nearly 10 years. So it's been a lot of journeys, honestly. It's aged everyone, and it continues to be a really volatile, tumultuous industry to be in as we mature.
Yeah, and you're uniquely placed being the CEO of DECA, Amy, that not only have you got the tenure and the longitudinal data set of being involved in the industry for 10 years, but you're also sitting at the top of the peak body for the industry. And so you've got a really good bird's eye view of the landscape and where it is today. How would you describe the industry today compared to where we've come from?
Well, I've been with the Industry Association for 6 years. Around 6 years ago, there was a merger between the Australian Digital Currency Association and the Blockchain Australia Association. And that was because both sides, the technology and the application, which is digital assets, came together and said, I think we're doing and we want the same things. And that was a maturation. And then the industry started to grow. But at that time, when I first joined the association, very, very new, the maturity of the industry was, we were still trying to find our feet. A lot of the membership was startups. There's a lot of innovation happening. A lot of new exchanges were launching. And obviously we still had our OGs of the exchange worlds. But look, it was a very different time. And I see that in a reflection of the membership base itself and the different types of verticals and industries that we have within the DECA membership now. So last year, we rebranded from Blockchain Australia to the Digital Economy Council of Australia. That was because of the membership base itself and the diversification of our members across multiple different verticals. And obviously we've seen the evolution of crypto. We see stablecoins, we saw NFTs, we've seen TradFi come in. Where do I start really? We've seen it move from Bitcoin all the way up to now tokenization and just the real innovation across trade and the economy itself. So we saw that and we decided we really need to embrace our members so that everyone sees themselves within the association. And so, we broadened and the representation is growing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fantastic. And you just had your main conference last month up in the Gold Coast, which which I attended and I found fantastic. I really enjoyed it. And I think in your opening address, you mentioned that you had doubled the number of attendees year on year. And that's a bit of a sign as well, isn't it?
It is. And also the appetite outside of of crypto is growing. So lots of different representatives across payments as well, and banking. We had our exchanges and digital asset businesses in there. We had international delegates come in as well. So that is just a real reflection of the appetite that we're seeing within Australia. Comparatively, globally, we could obviously see some developments in Australia that would fuel more innovation and fuel more growth, which is what the industry is seeking quite aggressively, actually, at the moment from the government. But back to the conference itself, the reason why it grew this year is because the focus was really on showcasing real world use cases across the whole blockchain ecosystem. Previously, there was a focus on digital assets, but what we know, particularly from the government lens, is, there's the requirement of evidence. What is your industry achieving? What are you contributing? Yep. And so we really wanted to showcase actually globally. So we had global businesses come in and showcase what our capability as an industry is, and the impact that we have and the contribution that we make to the Australian economy. So that was a purpose, and that's why the conversations and the sessions and the speakers were so diverse this year. And it was entertaining, I think.
It was, and really collaborative as well. It was just great to watch. And I think it's because there's so many entrepreneurs, there's so much innovation, and there's such a huge amount of potential for the technology that everybody just wants to support each other. And even when you see competing exchanges in the room, they're all actually collaborating and supporting each other, because they want the industry to continue to mature and evolve and grow, and they can see the potential is still only just really at a nascent level and in its infancy. And that was very evident in the conversations that I was having pretty much with everyone, really leaning on an open door no matter who you go up and talk to.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to help and wants to see if they can support you, which I found really energizing and motivating, particularly for my business.
Yeah. And look, I think that comes from a place of the experience that the industry has been through up until this point, where, I like to say your success is our success. We need to see every single person within our industry succeed so that we can move forward. In the past, it has been, the industry has not had, this is globally, the best reputation. That comes from media, that comes from, different governments who probably weren't as educated as they could be on the technology itself. And so obviously we've moved past that quite substantially now, but the industry has come from a place of, we've been targeted, and it's been really, really hard. So the only way to grow the industry is to stick together and collaborate and work together. And I think that's a differentiator between other industries and ours, where we have been through a lot. And so we've emerged as this really collaborative, friendly bunch who just want to help each other. And so that tough time has served us well, I guess, as a silver lining.
And apart from it being a showcase and a love fest, there were some really important messages that came through. I guess my main reflection on it was most of the conversations I was having with people in the industry, say 12 months ago, was all about stable coins and payments and how that was going to revolutionize things and it was going to hit the market with a major impact. And it has. But the conversation this year seemed to be more around real world assets and the transition of traditional ways of managing systems in a centralized, structured way into decentralized systems that are on the blockchain, and achieving similar benefits to stablecoins have shown for payments, where everything's faster and everything's cheaper and everything's more transparent and potentially more equitable and accessible. The real insight for me was that's the main topic that people are talking about now is real world assets, the digitalization or tokenization of things, and how that's going to take traction over the next 12 months. We'll start seeing a lot of that play out in the Australian economy. Did you see that? Was that one of your takeaways as well?
Absolutely. And I think Australia really needs to step up. We're talking a lot about efficiencies and, the success of Australia's digital economy, productivity. That's high on the agenda at the moment. Obviously, we've we've got a deficit in that regard, and we need to work on that. And so when we look at the different technologies and the capabilities of technologies, we look at what it can bring to the table. And I think that's why a lot of people are excited about tokenization and about stablecoins, because it's going to reduce the costs associated with trade and with all of imports and exports and you name it. It's probably, if we draw in on the efficiencies and the cost savings, it'll have a positive effect on the Australian economy. So that's what a lot of technologists like to focus on, which is why it's top of the conversation, because you like to draw on, the benefits and the real world use cases, which is, obviously from the Love Fest conference that you mentioned as well. That was, top of the subject matter. But yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about it as, different leaders and politicians and different governments start to really understand post that education process, because we have a lot of governments who aren't quite across what the benefits are. Post that process, when that clarity comes, I think it'll be a no-brainer. There's still work to do though, because within our circles, we're across it, but it's not for everyone. It's an acquired taste, actually.
Yeah, I think it is. But I think the acquired taste is really built on education, like you said, because most people that I speak to in traditional wealth management, for example, really don't understand what's going on in the industry and what's happening globally. And you can see why, because it's happening so rapidly. And the changes are so big and so fundamental. It's very hard for us who operate in the industry to stay across it and stay up to date. So it's almost impossible for anyone outside of the industry to actually stay current with it, especially when they've got their own core businesses and their own industries that they're operating in and their own priorities. So this is one of the biggest challenges I find is just helping them understand that it has moved past 2017, 2018, when it was dominated by speculative investment plays around digital assets, and it's actually evolved into an industry that is built on a technology that is being adopted across the board by countries everywhere, by sovereign states, and an investment class that is maturing and actually becoming much more diversified and a lot more stable as a result. So that maturation process, it really should be changing people's perspectives on it. But until they understand it, until they learn from that, they're still anchored in their old understanding. So how do you think we can better educate the industry, help them understand that there's a lot of potential value in the underlying technology? How can we get that message across?
I think we've all got a role to play with the distribution of palatable and digestible information. I'm talking one pages, even infographics. And I know it sounds really dumbed down, but people don't have time to read, a 1,000-page book on blockchain applications and the efficiencies that it brings. But you can, and we have it on a couple on our website, just infographics and just, some very broad points around the benefits of the technology. But I mean, there's also a branding issue around the technology itself and how people see digital assets and blockchain and the broader digital economy. There's been a history over the past decade where the association with the industry has been more around scams and fraud and the dark web and that sort of thing. Obviously, we've moved past that, and usually innovation doesn't wait for people to be educated. It just happens and you use it or you don't. Usually you have to, because that's the way that society is moving. And we saw that during COVID with QR codes, the QR codes were invented. And I don't know if you know the story about that, but it was basically a flop because no one was going to change the way they interact with the web based on, a QR code. That changed because people were forced to use it because that was the way that the world required them to interact with websites and tracking and all that sort of stuff. So I think irrespective of how much education we can provide, it'll make it easier for those people who are accountants or financial advisors who are a little bit averse at the moment to that education. It'll make it easier for them to move in and upskill and to be open and maybe not lose their job because they weren't open in the first place. But I do think that irrespective of any education we do, it will evolve. It hasn't stopped since Satoshi launched the white paper. It has only moved forward irrespective of all of the branding problems and it will continue to do so, to the point where, as you've seen, countries are adopting, the US is moving forward really quickly. So me just thinking about different industries and different professionals, and wanting to help them retain their positions and maybe upskill, I would say let's do as much education as possible, bite-sized pieces, but it's going to
Yep.
happen anyway. So it's up to them.
I like that. Innovation doesn't wait for education. That's a great little snippet. It is understandable that accountants, financial planners are sort of holding back because the systems around them haven't evolved to adopt it and accept it. And a lot of the gatekeepers, I guess, for the industry, still not on board with it because they don't really understand it, or perhaps there's other, vested interests which might be, perhaps playing a bit of a protectionist role in there as well. Um, Protecting consumers is their key priority, which is as it should be. Um, but you're not protecting consumers by refusing to actually support them in an advised relationship,
Mm.
because the consumers are just going to go and do it by themselves. All you're doing is protecting your participants, the practices and the dealer groups, and the from potentially a bad experience in that asset class, but you're not protecting the consumer. So I think the industry needs to evolve its thinking there. And I think that's going to come down to the licensees having conversations with asset consultants and really getting a better understanding of the asset class. Insurers have to play a role in actually developing a better understanding of the asset class and offering coverage which is appropriate for an advised industry.
Yeah.
And all of that needs to be supported, or at least facilitated to a degree, by the peak bodies in those areas. I know that some of those peak bodies, the boards are not supporting digital assets as an asset class. So I'm wondering, how do we influence, say, the boards of these peak bodies to say you need to think about this? Is this something that a change in political sentiment might be the precursor to that, or how do we get to those boards and actually evolve their thinking?
We've got some pretty good relationships internationally. We have MOUs with other industry associations. We also have really good relationships with a couple of the accounting bodies as well. I think, I mean, it sounds, we started with a kumbaya conversation around the conference and the love fest, but really, you have to bring the silos together and have a conversation, recognize that there's a gap, and the digital asset industry, blockchain innovators, there's a lot of software providers, there's a lot of builders within our membership base who can bring education in. So I think the relationship between industry bodies needs to evolve. Now, we've done our fair share of outreach, and it's actually probably one of the funner things to do, having these, really deep conversations with other industries around how we can work together. I think that's probably one of the biggest steps that we can take in supporting each other. I also think that an industry association really does need to beat on the doors of our policymakers and our government to bring about change, because the confidence that, let's say, financial planners or advisors have, that they don't feel confident in advising because they don't have that regulatory framework around them. That they're not going to take that risk. So there needs to be regulation. There needs to be clarity. Otherwise, their only choice is to remain stationary. So as industry associations, we can together, if we all come to the table together as a united front to make these changes and to push, I think that's probably one of the mechanisms that we can use. And we should just assemble, really, is what I'm trying to get to here. But then, the different industry associations come together, and we're not going to mention any names, but I know who you're talking about. They just need to be, I guess, more open to the relationship.
I was really impressed, actually, that the representation at the DECA conference, there was, I think, 4 or 5 people from ASIC there for all 3 days, and they were very accessible. I spoke to all of them a number of times. Everybody was just walking up and chatting to them. It was I was really impressed with that. I mean, they weren't, throwing their arms around us and saying, "Hey, come and we'll pave the way." They were being very pragmatic and reserved about it, but that's what they should be. But I was just impressed that they had such a good representation there and they were so engaged. And you obviously had some politicians there as well. So we had Molino dialed in and also Andrew Charlton came and attended as well. So how would you describe the health of the conversations politically, and maybe start at that political layer? I know that there's a Parliamentary Friends of Blockchain or something group that's formed. Can you tell us a bit about that? Is it bipartisan? How influential is it? How what's the state of play there? When do you think that we'll start seeing those politicians really giving the regulators and the legislators the direction that they need in order to be able to provide clarity to the market?
Yeah, look, the conference we had, like you said, we had ASIC Treasury, we had AUSTRAC join us as a speaker, and different politicians. That is a direct reflection of how far we've come as an industry. The doors are open now. And if I look back and, we started our conversation just having a deep dive into where we were 10 years ago, there is a very fluid conversation happening across the board with our politicians and with our various departments, and it is fruitful. Very, very different to what we saw 12 months ago. So it takes a lot of work to get to that point, but I'm quite confident, and industry is quite confident that those relationships will continue to grow and flourish. On the regulation side of things, we are awaiting that draft legislation, and so we do require leadership from government to achieve that. We also, we've got the industry assembled in various formats. Coming back to the Parliamentary Friends, though, that is a bipartisan group. The last Parliamentary Friends, I don't know if you're familiar with a Parliamentary Friends group, but it's a support of a particular initiative or a subject matter. In our case, it's the broader blockchain and digital asset space and of course the digital economy. Essentially what we do is there's usually a format. It could be a lunch, it could be a networking event, or it could be the launch of a policy paper. Usually a few of them have been the launch of various policy papers, but the last one was a networking event, and it was a smaller sort of luncheon. It was the first Parliamentary Friends, and this is also a signal as to the evolution of the industry. At the moment, we had almost an equal amount of industry, so crypto and blockchain industry, as we did to government. So we had the Prime Minister's office in there, we had politicians from both sides, and Treasury and ASIC in the room. So it's a direct reflection, I think, just looking back, because the first Parliamentary Friends was quite small and it was a lunch, and we had our two chairs, Andrew Charlton and Senator Andrew Bragg, in the room and at the table at the time. And they continue to be our champions across both sides. Yeah, so now the Parliamentary Friends, the next one will be on July 28th. We'll be launching our proactive policy paper that is the result of our policy forum that we hold every year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it will be, and it's an educational piece to that point around tokenization, taxation, and trade digitalization. So we'll be touching on those and sharing the paper, which is about 36 pages long.
Fantastic. I look forward to reading it. And do you think that it's a pure coincidence that the politicians are becoming more interested now that a third of Australians own crypto as an investment?
I think that number's a bit low. I do think yes. And one of the first initial drivers was the US election, where crypto was one of the drivers of votes. Really, there was a cohort of young crypto investors, and I think Trump was speaking directly to that cohort. And that was an acknowledgement that the crypto industry, crypto investors were a massive piece of the population, and speaking to them could sort of sway an election, which is what you found in the US. So during that time, Australian politicians did look to the US, and they were, we're a very, very different jurisdiction though. So we obviously didn't go down the same path. It would have been a very different story if we did. But yeah, we saw, and there was a recognition that crypto was a big piece of the puzzle, and so it needed to have a little bit more attention than it had previously had. And yeah, so we did see some interest from different politicians come from that stage.
Yeah, I think there's similarities, but obviously quite different systems as well. And it did appear like there was a lot of single issue voters coming out and voting based on crypto in the US, and because obviously it's not compulsory for them to vote. So it's more likely to engage them around something like this. And but in Australia, even though we've got the ninth highest adoption rate of crypto in the world as a country, it doesn't feel like it's a single issue topic for voters in Australia yet. But I do look at it and think, our 25 to 35-year-old cohort, there's more than 50% of people at that age group own crypto now, which is mind-boggling, really. And look, admittedly, I sort of look at them and think that they see it more like a sports bet account than a ComSec account kind of thing. But it doesn't matter. They're still engaged with it, and they're still learning, and that gives them this great insight into the asset class, and it gives the providers the ability to be able to take that younger generation on an educational journey and teach them investing, even though they may not have come in with necessarily realistic goals or targets about what they wanted. Nonetheless, they're engaged, and you've got that opportunity to start assisting them and building them with a bit more of a longer term strategies. And when you start seeing that, I think that will become much more influential in their voting preferences. If you've got governments coming in and actually recognizing that and actually catering to that, rather than just traditionally skewing to the baby boomer segment with where all the wealth already exists, then, at some point there will be a tipping point where the weighted numbers bias away from the baby boomer older demographic from a voting bloc to the younger demographic who are looking for something different. I think that I don't know when that tipping point's going to arrive, but I'd imagine it's going to be in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think so too. This is an onion, really, very, very multi-layered, where when we look at the demographics and what sort of investments they're making, what it says, I think, to the government is that Australians are evolving. What they need and what they want is evolving. It's not just around digital assets. It's also around their preferences in life and what they prefer to hold and what they just don't think that they have any chance of access to. And also the personality of the younger demographic, what they values around different generations is shifting to the point where, owning different things isn't really that important. And in a lot of ways, when I have conversations with younger people, which I do a lot because I've got younger nieces and nephews and also children myself, it's more about making an impact. What am I going to do with my life? Buying property and that sort of thing, it's interesting because it's not top of mind. It's more, what sort of job am I going to have? And what am I going to do with my life? And maybe I might get involved in something digital over here. It might be crypto. It might be gaming. It could be anything. But it's really, when you talk about different opportunities, and this is not financial advice, but when you talk about investment to young people, it's almost as if it's not their number one. They just really want to do better. And they see the different path that the older generations went down as not being optimal. And so I think we will see government respond to that trajectory, to what Australians want. And at the moment, there's housing crisis. There's all sorts of issues that we're having in Australia that's front of mind. But yeah, I just think Australia is going to be a different place, and our priorities will be different, and the government will evolve and speak to those priorities.
I've got young adults, children as well, and a lot of the things that I guess we grew up aspiring to do and achieve, they have a very different mindset. They feel locked out. They feel like it's simply not accessible for them. And despite all of these headwinds that they've got, and they can look at the world in a fairly bleak lens at times as well, I think blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies and as real shining lights of hope of a new of something better, so a hope for something that they can access and achieve a step change improvement in society over. So I think that it's really exciting, and that's probably part of the reason why younger generations have really flocked to it as well. It is that hope element. So speaking of hope, Bitcoin's just plumbed new all-time highs as we're talking, as we're recording. If we were having this conversation again in 12 months from now, what do you think would be a likely environment that we're going to be operating in, and what would be the bull scenario of that?
Yeah, look, as soon as we have the clarity around regulation, we will see international interests converge really on Australia, and we'll see a consolidation. So the conversations I have outside of Australia are around when's regulation coming, because we want to move in, or they're itching to move into Australia, or they already are. No one knows they're here. And as soon as the regulation comes in, they're going to launch, and they're going to launch really hard. And they're currently looking at different businesses who are operating here to acquire. So we don't see that on the surface, but under the surface, the duck is paddling and you can't see the ripples. So what will happen once we see that regulation is an environment for growth and scaling and clarity, consolidation. Businesses will buy each other, they will merge together. And I do see that in the next 12 months when that clarity comes. So, when you're watching the Olympics or, you're on your marks, get set, go, we're in that just about to launch stage. As soon as that gun is fired, you will see massive change in the industry. And that's where I worry about our accountants and our financial advisors, because once that clarity comes, it'll be more of a sprint. And you'll have to catch up really, really fast because you haven't done the legwork before the sprint. So I would say in 12 months' time, if everything goes to plan, maybe 18 months, we will be going for gold, I think, as Australia.
Right. So we're at the starting blocks, and the starter's pistol, that's when legislation is announced, passes Parliament, or when the draft comes out. And what do you think that trigger point will be?
Yeah, look, I think when the draft comes out, the clarity will be there, because changes to that they're probably not going to be great. So the clarity will be in, okay, what's the law going to be? How can we operate? What sort of licenses are we going to need? We're going to go ahead as international businesses and just go and get those now that we have the clarity, and then we'll move in. So I think it's as soon as that draft legislation is presented, we will see. You still won't see anything on the surface, because those businesses who are planning to move in will start moving through that stage with confidence. And as soon as the gun goes off and it's passed, everyone will be flying their flag, I think, and just saying, hey, we're here, we want your business. Or the announcements around different consolidations and mergers will happen, acquisitions.
And what's your gut feel on when that legislation will be presented?
Look, it should be before the end of the year. There's a few things that are happening. Obviously, the guidance from ASIC is required, and the draft legislation is being drafted, actually, as we speak. So, look, it should be the regulatory initiatives grid, which was released by Labor earlier this year, does say that the draft legislation should be released second quarter. I do think it's going to be a little bit later than that. And there might be some changes to what we were expecting, but I don't think they're going to be substantial. That's my view, but that's, that could change with whatever's released. So, yeah, before the end of the year, hopefully.
Fantastic. Wow. Super exciting times.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, thank you for all that insight. That's actually given me a lot more clarity than I had as well. So the industry is primed, it's ready to go, and we're here to help anyone who wants to learn more about it.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. All right, Amy, how can people find out more about DECA and follow you?
LinkedIn is the best spot to find me. DECA.org.au is where you'll find the association.
Fantastic. All right. I'll put them across here so that people can see it, and I'm sure you'll get a few followers as a result.
Thanks.
Amy, thank you so much for coming along and being on the podcast, and also for all of your help that you've given to the industry and to me personally as well over this journey. It really means a lot. The industry's in a much better place to have having people like you in those leadership roles. So thank you.
Thanks, Andrew, and right back at you. Thanks for everything you do.
All right.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. All views of Andrew McPhee and his guests are their opinions only and do not reflect the opinions of Synergist. You should not treat any opinions expressed as a specific inducement to make a particular investment or follow a particular strategy.